Welcome back to my channel. In today's episode I will tell you about the events of 2002, which took place in Pontypool, Wales. In this episode, you are invited to listen to the story of Jenna Baldwin. Today's story happened in 2002 to a small town located in South Wales. The town was home to Desiree and Michael Baldwin and their 3 children. The father of 15-year-old Desiree's oldest child was not Michael. Desiree had been married before. She married her first husband quite early, when she was 19, and unfortunately that relationship did not stand the test of time. The marriage fell apart when Jenna was just 18 months old. However, Desiree did not raise a child alone for long, because when her daughter was 3 years old, she met Michael Baldwin. Very quickly she realized that he was the perfect partner for her. He adored Jenna, and the little girl loved him just as much. Desiree and Michael's relationship developed very quickly, and it didn't take long for them to get married. Jenna's mother then took the name of her new husband, and because she wanted her daughter, also named after her mother and stepfather, Desiree asked her ex-husband if she could change Jenna's name. He didn't mind, so soon after, the girl was also named Baldwin. And for a while the 3 of them constituted a small loving family. After a while, 2 more children, a boy and a girl, appeared in Desiree and Michael's relationship. Jenna adored her siblings. She was very comfortable as an older sister and tried to take care of her brother and sister in her spare time. She did everything with them, drew, played with blocks or went to the pool with them. She was really a lovely girl. Only, everything changed when she was about 13 years old. Suddenly she was no longer the sweet little girl who willingly helps around the house and takes care of her siblings without a problem. Jenna started rebelling against everything and causing a lot of problems for her parents. Both Desiree and Michael found it difficult to understand what caused such a change in her behavior, and there were increasingly frequent clashes between the 3 of them. Jenna, despite the fact that she was doing really well at school and was among the students who learned very well, refused to go to school. She didn't give them any specific reason, she most simply felt that she didn't really need it for anything. And it happened that she didn't always go to school, even though she should. This situation lasted nearly 2 years, and it was the same in 2002. The summer vacation went peacefully in the Baldwin family. Jenna did not have to go to school then, and therefore there were no major clashes between her and her parents. But as the school year began to approach, the atmosphere in this family became increasingly tense. Jenna knew that she would not go to school in September. And in fact, on the 4th of September 2002, as soon as the school year began, she announced to her parents that she wasn't going anywhere. Desiree was very upset about all this, and tried to explain to her daughter the importance of education, that she should finish school, but the teenager thought otherwise. Therefore, when Jenna's mother had a break at work, she went home to see if anything had changed. Maybe Jenna had changed her mind after all and went to school. But when she pulled up in front of the house, she noticed her daughter standing in front of the door and trying to get inside. The door was locked, and there was a key in the lock from the inside. There was no way to open it. Michael was in the house at the time, only that he had probably already gone to bed after returning from his night shift, and apparently did not hear the knocking at the door. It's hard to say whether he left the key in the lock by accident or did it on purpose, not wanting his stepdaughter to stay in the house. In any case, neither of them could get inside. Therefore, the 2 got into Desiree's car and she drove her daughter to her aunt's. Before they got there they talked for 15 minutes more about education, and the girl promised her mother that she would go back to school from Monday. This conversation took place on Wednesday, from which it was clear that Jenna wanted to take 2 more days off, but as soon as the new week started she would immediately return to school. She knew that what she was doing was not the smartest thing to do, and eventually she had to change her behavior. It seemed that finally Jenna understood that such behavior does not lead anywhere. Her mother drove her to her aunt's house and drove back to work herself. She was going to see her daughter at the end of the weekend. Until then the girl wanted to stay at her aunt's house. On Sunday, her aunt contacted Desiree and Michael, asking if Jenna was with them, since she herself had not been in contact with her for 3 days. On Thursday morning, September 5th, She left the house saying she had something to take care of and did not return again. Desiree became a little concerned about this information and started calling her daughter. She always had her phone with her and should have picked up right away. But despite calling repeatedly, Jenna did not answer. That was rather not her usual style. Desiree started then to call all of Jenna's friends she knew. This would no longer be the first time her daughter had disappeared from home for a few days, after which she returns as if nothing had happened. Usually, she would stay at home with one of her friends or her boyfriend. But this time Desiree called them all, and no one had any idea where Jenna might be. The woman was concerned about the situation, but decided to give her daughter some more time. And indeed, the girl returned home on Tuesday, after contacting her stepfather on Monday. On the phone, she only communicated that everything was fine with her, and that she would come home the next day. And while Desiree was at work, Jenna reportedly came home with her friend. Michael had never seen her before. It must have been some new friend. Jenna just took a shower, picked up some clothes, and the girls left. But he had the impression that both of them were acting in a strange way. They were highly agitated, and he had the impression that they had taken something. He had never seen his daughter behaving like that before. Desiree was glad when she heard about her daughter's visit home. At least she knew that everything was fine. She was a little heartbroken that she hadn't told them her whereabouts, but she was confident that she would be home soon. But a week after her mother's last sighting, Jenna still hadn't shown up at home. It was already Thursday, the 12th of September, and she still hadn't returned. The girls' parents were visited by one of the school staff, as they were all concerned that Jenna had not appeared there once since the school year began. And it was during this conversation that Desiree learned from her husband about Jenna and her friend's strange behavior. At first she was angry with him for not telling her about it earlier. Why only after a school employee showed up at their house? Jenna had never had to deal with any stimulants. It was completely out of character for her. Desiree was angry with Michael, but she knew that at that moment it was not the most important thing. She decided to call the police and report her daughter missing. Both she and Michael were questioned later that same day, and the police officers learned more about Jenna. They had already seen that she was not the easiest child. She often rebelled against her parents, and there were frequent arguments between them. During these brawls, she used language that was rather inappropriate for her younger siblings. And the parents were worried about what effect this might have on their youngest children, but Jenna wasn't too concerned about it. She disappeared from home for several days before, but never for as long as this time, and they never had a problem contacting her before. This escape was different. She had her phone turned off, making it impossible for them to reach her. And on top of that, she had a new friend that no one knew. Desiree and Michael probably knew all of their daughter's friends, but they had never met this girl before. Who was she, and did she have anything to do with Jenna's disappearance? At that stage it was difficult for investigators to determine what had happened to the missing girl, or whether she had simply once again run away from home, however this time for a little longer. Or maybe something happened, she had an accident, and is currently in the hospital. They also had to take into account that Jenna might have been kidnapped, or worse, was already dead. And since the cops had already talked to Jenna's parents, it was time to find out more from her friends. It is well known that when it comes to children of this age, friends know more about their secrets than parents. Maybe the police officers could find out something that Desiree and Michael had no idea about. But unfortunately, they didn't find out anything that could help determine her whereabouts. She was last seen by one of her friends, on September 5th, in the early afternoon, and no one saw her again in the days that followed. However, maybe she ran away from home as she had previously mentioned to her friends. Apparently, she was so tired of her relationship with her parents that she was even thinking of leaving to London. Could she really have left for the capital? She didn't seem to know anyone there, but maybe her new friend had some acquaintances there. But one thing puzzled the policemen: if she was going to be gone for a long time, which they might have suspected at that point, why, after checking the girl's bedroom, it turned out that not too many things had disappeared from her room and closet. And it's not just clothes, because Jenna also left all her cosmetics. What had been established by those times completely didn't match up, but hadn't she left of her own will? Of course, in addition to the fact that the police were involved in the search for the teenager, her family and friends were also trying to help. Many flyers were printed and hung all over the city. As you know, in such cases even the smallest detail can make a difference. The police received a lot of information. The girl was reportedly seen in various places and every clue had to be checked. This, unfortunately, meant that police officers really had a lot of work, reviewing the footage from surveillance cameras. However, each time it ended the same way. It turned out that it was not Jenna. It was still unclear what had happened to her, but her mother suspected that the girl was alive, just being held somewhere. What allowed her to think so? One day she received a call from an unknown number. She answered, but the person on the other end of the phone did not speak. Desiree heard breathing, but no one said a word until the call was cut off. Was it Jenna, only for some reason she couldn't speak? It's possible that she was being held somewhere, and that's how she wanted to let people know she was still alive. Desiree immediately called the number that had been displayed on her phone moments earlier. Maybe the person could be reunited. And indeed, after a while the phone was answered by a man. But in the course of talking to him, Jenna's mother learned that the call had been made from a booth. As soon as she found out where this booth was located, she immediately went there, hoping to find her daughter somewhere nearby. But unfortunately, she was nowhere to be seen near the place. In further investigation, the police officers decided to talk to Jenna's ex-boyfriend. The two were no longer together. After 2 years of relationship, they decided to separate mainly on Jenna's initiative. Chris was older than her. There was a 4-year difference between them, but despite this the girl seemed more mature than he was. Over time, the difference between them began to become more and more apparent, and the teenager decided that it was time to end the relationship. They were no longer together, but they remained friends and continued to meet frequently. Chris would show up at Jenna's house, and she would occasionally stay at his apartment. And for this reason, the investigators wanted not only to talk to him, but also to search his apartment. When they got there, they noticed the drawings in Chris's room. On the walls hung many pictures, which showed a coffin with the inscription, "Jenna rests in peace." Given that the girl had been missing for several days and it was not known what had happened to her, drawings with such a subject seemed suspicious to police officers. In addition, blood-stained clothing was found in Chris's room, and all this led officers to decide to arrest him on suspicion of murdering Jenna. But it soon became clear that this was not the right lead. Chris explained to investigators that he and Jenna often drew coffins and gravestones with their names on them. Chris drew them, as well as his ex-girlfriend. They saw nothing wrong with this. As for the blood-stained clothing found in his room, on the other hand, it was examined carefully, and there was indeed blood on it. However, it did not belong to Jenna. With no evidence that Chris might have had anything to do with Jenna's disappearance, police officers were forced to release him from custody. Another day passed since Jenna was last seen, and the police officers had not really managed to establish anything. Once again, they found themselves at breaking point, and had to try to find a solution to the case in some other way. It was then decided to check where Jenna had called from when she contacted Michael the day before she showed up at home with a friend. Perhaps this would make it possible to determine her whereabouts. But despite her stepfather's assurances that he had spoken to her that day, it was established that nothing of that sort had taken place. There was no call from Jenna's phone that day. She did not make any calls to Michael, so why did the stepfather testify earlier that such a thing had taken place? Could it be that he lied to the police, as well as to his own wife, because he had something to hide? Until investigators learned that Michael had lied about it, no one considered him a suspect. The cops saw how deeply he was affected by the disappearance of his stepdaughter, and it seemed to them that everything he did was sincere. If he actually had something to do with the girl's disappearance, then they must admit that he was a very good actor. They began to take a closer look at him, all the more so because after Desiree made a televised appeal, during which she asked people for any information about her daughter, the police began to receive calls from many people who had supposedly seen Jenna somewhere. What was suspicious, however, was that a good portion of these calls were anonymous, and the caller always called from a public phone booth. Of course, In other cases such situations also occurred, but when it came to the search for Jenna, there were definitely more of these calls. Investigators found this strange, so they checked where Michael was at the time these calls were made. And it was confirmed that each time he was neither at work nor at home with his family. Finding this out made the police officers even more suspicious of him. Did he really have anything to do with the disappearance of his stepdaughter? They began to follow Michael, and in addition, in order to provoke his action, the officers told him that, if in the near future the girl does not contact anyone from the family, they will have to expand the investigation. They hoped that after giving him this information, he would want to prove that Jenna was still alive, and again go to the phone booth, from which he would make a phone call to Desiree. But to the police officer's surprise, this was not the case. Michael did not call anywhere from a public phone, but went to a cell phone store and bought a new phone there. Before buying it, however, he did not give his real name, but some fake one. What he was doing was getting weirder and weirder, and the policemen suspected that they were watching the right person. At one point, they noticed that Michael immediately threw the box into the trash after opening the new phone. Thanks to the fact that the policemen immediately took it, they already knew the serial number of this phone. And shortly after making the purchase, Michael began using this cell phone, calling mainly Desiree or Jenna's biological father from it. He never said anything specific during these calls, often not speaking at all, and sometimes whispering some unintelligible words. But Jenna's mother was convinced it was her daughter calling anyway. From the same phone number, the woman began receiving messages. However, she immediately knew that although they were notoriously signed by Jenna, she was not the one who wrote them. There were many mistakes in the messages, and Desiree knew that her daughter did not make such mistakes. She had no problems with spelling. She did very well at school, by the way. She wrote a lot of messages to her mother, and there were never such mistakes in them before. Someone else must have sent them on her behalf, and regardless of the fact that in these messages she wrote that everything was fine with her, that she was happy, as well as for her mother to tell the police that they should leave her alone, Desiree was convinced that someone was holding her and not letting her talk to her family. She had no idea who that person might be, but investigators knew well who was sending her those text messages. Michael's behavior only confirmed the investigators' suspicions. He knew a lot more than he was telling them and could certainly have information about Jenna. Further down the line, it was unclear what had happened to her, whether Michael was holding her somewhere, or whether she was already dead. They did not inform Desiree of their findings. They wanted to see how things would develop further. Maybe Michael would eventually make a mistake, or not knowing he was being watched would lead them to Jenna. And the man continued to run his game. From the phone he had purchased a few days earlier, he would call his wife or send her text messages, pretending to be Jenna. But after some time, Desiree decided to check if it was actually her daughter writing the messages. And she asked her a question that only she could know the answer to. She wanted to know from her what the girl had painted in her grandfather's house after his death. The correct answer was radiators. But shortly after sending a text message with that question, Desiree received a message saying it was a Christmas picture. This was not the correct answer, and Jenna would certainly have known what to answer. This only served as confirmation to Desiree that it was not her daughter who sent the message. She immediately told Michael about everything, and didn't have to wait long for another text message, in which she already received the correct answer to the question. The mother felt a huge sense of relief. Jenna was still alive, only she knew the correct answer. Maybe she didn't send the messages herself, someone didn't let her, but she was definitely still alive. Investigators could not rule out this option. There was a possibility that the girl was still alive. However, subsequent findings in the case made police officers increasingly convinced that she may have already been killed. Talking again to Jenna's neighbors and friends, they learned that she did not have the best relationship with her stepfather. There were frequent clashes between them, which occurred even when her friends were in the house. Michael was not bothered by their presence. There were times when, in front of them, he called her names or even told her to leave the house. There was a lot that bothered him about his stepdaughter's behavior. He didn't like it when she listened to music loudly, went to bed late, then got up late the next day. but what annoyed him most was when the teenager made fun of him for starting to lose his hair. Baldness was a huge complex for Michael, which she was well aware of and took advantage of during every argument. And they happened quite often. The neighbors had exactly the same opinion about the relationship. More than once they saw or heard the two of them arguing. And one neighbor remembered well how, a week before she disappeared, Jenna had tried to get into the house. She did not have her keys, because Michael knew that if she had one, she would come home with her friends, and this would disturb his sleep. The man worked in a factory, where every day he worked a night shift. As soon as the children left for school, he would go to bed. And that day, a neighbor heard Jenna knocking on the door all the time, trying to convince Michael to let her in. Apparently, he had no intention of doing so, because she stood outside the house for quite some time. Only when she threatened him that she would be the one laughing when her mother found out everything. Only then the door of the house opened, and she could go inside. Just a moment later, the neighbor could hear screams coming from there. This was certainly not the best relationship a teenager could have with her stepfather. What else was established regarding Michael was also disturbing. When he was first questioned and he told police officers exactly what he had been doing on September 5th and 6th. According to his words, on September 5th to 6th, after he returned from his night shift, he was supposed to take the children to school and then immediately return home and go to bed. But it was quickly established that on that day, at around 9 a.m., he withdrew money from a cash point, and shortly after that he went to the store, where he bought a shovel. This took place on September 6th, and according to Michael, on September 9th Jenna called him, and a day later she came home with a friend. If, according to investigators' suspicions, the shovel was needed to hide the body, then the story with the girl and her friend was also fabricated. That's probably why no one knew who she was, because she didn't exist. Investigators suspected that the chances of finding Jenny alive were slim. The girl was probably dead, and the focus was already on searching ponds, canals, or other places where Michael could have hidden her. Still, no one in the family has been informed that he is the main suspect in this case. Regardless of whether the girl was still alive or had already been killed, the police hoped that Michael would eventually lead them to her. But since nothing like that was happening, the investigators decided to do something that could force Michael to lead them to Jenna. They asked Desiree to send a text message to the phone number from which the messages were sent, asking Jenna to send some personal item that would confirm that it was her trying to contact the family. The police guessed that this might provoke Michael to go to the place where the girl's body was located to take something from there. They saw that he would try to do everything to keep everyone thinking that Jenna was alive, but to the policeman's surprise, this did not happen. They may have seen Michael dropping the envelope into the mailbox, but the man was under surveillance for 24 hours and certainly did not return to where the body may have been. So what was in that envelope? When it was delivered to the Baldwin home, it was immediately intercepted by officers who, upon opening it, were able to see the ring. However, it wasn't Jenna's ring, but her mother's. Michael claimed to have seen Jenna wearing it several times, but her mother was convinced this was not the case. She never once saw this ring on her daughter's finger. However, for the investigators, the jewelry was not the most important thing. They were more interested in the envelope in which the ring was sent. She was examined and it was possible to determine whether the man was the person who sent the letter. Of course, he could have touched it when the letter was delivered, but in addition to fingerprints, the DNA found under the stamp or in the place where the envelope was sealed was examined. If it was Michael who sent this letter, there is a very good chance that his DNA would be found in these places. And after testing, it turned out that the postage stamp contained the DNA of another person. However, the envelope had to be sealed by Michael himself, because the DNA sample collected matched his DNA. As it later turned out, Jenna's sister helped him stick the postage stamp. This was further confirmation that the man who had something to do with the disappearance, and perhaps even the murder, was her stepfather. There was no point in waiting any longer for him to lead them to the girl. Therefore, on October 29th, almost 2 months, Jenna was last seen. Michael Baldwin has been arrested. Of course, he pleaded not guilty. He claimed he didn't know what happened to his stepdaughter. However, He had no idea that he had been under surveillance for a long time, and the police knew well that it was him who called and wrote to Desiree. And that he was the one who sent her the ring, which was supposed to be confirmation that the girl was still alive. He did not expect that the investigators managed to find out so much, but even the disclosure of this information did not change his position. He probably believed that since his body had not been found, no charges could be brought against him. And despite the policeman's best efforts, Michael still did not confess to anything. This situation has not changed for some time. The girl's mother, who was already convinced that Jenna was dead, insisted that he tell her where her body was. But the woman's husband kept trying to convince her that he had nothing to do with Jenna's disappearance, or her murder. Desiree didn't want to visit him in prison until Michael confessed to everything. She also didn't want to talk to him on the phone. The only condition for this to change was for her husband to reveal the truth. But it wasn't until she told him that he wouldn't see his children until he admitted where he hid the body that Michael realized he had to reveal it. He told Desiree where the place was over the phone. Initially, the police had difficulty finding this location. They searched in the forest near the road that Michael had indicated 10 kilometers from their house, but they couldn't find anything. They even thought that the man had lied to them on purpose. But eventually Michael himself led them to where Jenna's body was. Finally, after many weeks of searching, she was found on November 19th. But what happened that led to her death? The 36-year-old told investigators his version of events, according to which she came to the house on September 5th, and they started arguing. The man was very upset about this situation. He was tired at the time, and all he could think about was going back to bed. He finally wanted to sleep. But Jenna kept shouting at him and tapping him with her finger, which made him so mad that at one point he pushed her away and the girl fell down the stairs. He then noticed that she was unconscious, so he decided to take her to the hospital. He put her in his car and drove off, all the while hearing her breathing heavily. But eventually the sound stopped. Michael realized that she was dead and then began to panic. He stopped by the road, and after a short while in the car, he decided to leave her body there. Except this story couldn't possibly be true. The autopsy revealed no injuries or fractures that could confirm that Jenna died from a fall. The entire event, which unfolded as Michael described, also made no sense. If it were really as he described, Jenna couldn't have fallen down the stairs. Once again the man lied. This was one version of events presented to investigators by the stepfather. And because the body was in such a condition that the autopsy did not allow determining the cause of her death, the police could only guess what happened. They knew that Michael had trained in judo in the past and was a brown belt. To obtain it, he had to be able to demonstrate several choking techniques. The police suspected that it was one of them that led to her death. These are just speculations, however, because Michael did not change his version of events, even during the trial, which began in June 2003. He was then found guilty of Jenna's death and was sentenced to life imprisonment. But why did Jenna die? Did she know something that Michael was afraid of revealing? Did he have a secret that could harm him if it came to light? Only Michael knows the answers to these questions, and it is unclear whether he will ever want to reveal the truth. In 2007, his sentence was changed. He was still sentenced to life imprisonment, but a date was set when he would be eligible for early parole. It was supposed to take place no earlier than 2016. If the parole board found he was not a danger to society, he could be released. It's hard for me to say whether he's still in prison or maybe he's already free. The last article I found about this case was in 2013, and I don't know what happened to Michael. His ex-wife certainly hopes that he will never leave prison. This is the end of this story. Thank you for listening to the end. Goodbye for now.